Welcome to my channel. All right, Christine Brown Woolley's book, let's talk about it. It's been 2 days since I've read it, and I have reread almost most of the book at this point, trying to dissect my thoughts. We've been going through some videos of some of the key points, some highlights, doing an overall review. And now I just want to go into a little bit of critical view here, not to pile on Christine, but I do think there's going to be aspects of this book that may cause some viewers to be a little bit upset. I think there's going to be a deception exposed of the show where you really do learn that they've lied about everything for so many years. I think you're going to learn about Christine and some of the MLM stuff that she promotes and how that doesn't align to what she says in the book and how she uses specific medications in lie of, natural supplements like she sells. And most importantly, I think you'll be, if you care about polygamy, I guess, and you care that it's a harm to women and children, and if you care that this family you believed was on there to promote polygamy and show you a better way, I think you'll be angry to know that the family knew the entire time they were filming that their church, the Apostolic United Brethren, was just as bad as the FLDS. And despite their proclamations over and over and over again that their church was not like that, it was, and it is, and it still is. And Christine vacillates between having very positive memories of her childhood, but also has conflicting views about she was born in a cult, she raised her children in the cult, but then unable to really critically analyze any mistakes that she made. She speaks and writes a lot about how this culture and this faith makes people narcissistic. And she even taps into her own levels of narcissism in this book. And she went through a lot of trauma with Kody, 100%. She lied a lot on the show. And obviously, it's my understanding that if she didn't lie, life was going to be hell for her off camera. Kody would withdraw his affection. He would not spend time with her children. He would abandon her. I think there's a level of cognitive dissonance with her where she had to stay in a bubble of denial. And I think till to this day, there's still a lot of denial here because she admits that this show has caused a lot of harm to the family. She admits that none of her kids want to be on the show anymore, truly doesn't want to be on the show. And even at the end, in the epilogue, she says she's ready to be done with the show. In fact, she says she doesn't even know why they're still making this show, why they're still even filming, because the show was over. She truly believed that when she left Kody, she would be leaving the show, and that's not what has happened because of her contract. And she goes into Kody was controlling, but Kody wasn't controlling. But at the end of the book, it sounds very much like she's leaving. For instance, she said, I think the show helped our family. We all developed voices and learned to speak out. We learned to look back and think about all of it rather than simply struggling through the day-to-day with no context. Sometimes I watch something now and I think, wow, that was crazy. And that helps me process. I think Sister Wives has been a realistic representation of us. She says that after admitting to lying on camera a lot. So it's a little, you'll read the book and you'll be like, well, was it a realistic representation if what you were doing was lying, or is it just lying within the family, a realistic representation of you? You know what I mean? And it's shown me at my best and my worst. You've seen me jealous and secure inside, but I've also seen me happy and excited, motivated, and meditating. The crew has been wonderful, and when we left the hospital with Truly after she was born, one of the crew members rode with us. I think they think of themselves as her uncles because they watched her grow up. We've watched them too as they've gone from young people to married people to people with kids. They've always done what they could to make our experience as positive as possible, even on those bad days. But my kids are ready to be done with the show. She quotes Aspen as saying, you know what, I think I've lived your life long enough. I want to live my own life now. Fair. Truly doesn't want to be on the show anymore. She said she was on the set once after I left Kody, and I thought, we're not doing this. She's still in the background and part of activities, but she hasn't been on the show set since. I don't need her to know about the show or all of our stuff. I've never let her watch it, especially the last few years. Most of the other kids don't watch it either. I admit that I was surprised when we learned that there would be another season. How can there be anything after all that, I thought? What are they going to film? It would have been incredible simply to live my life with David. Instead, I'm working with producers on storylines. Maybe the starting over is the story, the hopeful bit. So much of my life now is figuring out retirement, taking care of our vacation rental, and looking for another one and spending time with grandkids. Janelle and I still do things together and we'll film that. She has her flower farm, which feels like a dream come true. I've loved doing the show. I loved it being a part of our life. I loved all the opportunities we had. But most of all, I love the change that has come from me as a person. I love who I am today that came from the show and living polygamy and all the people I've met along the way. The book starts in the beginning of season 19, and now they're going to be doing season 20. And for her, it sounds like it's done after the end of the season. And she says she doesn't want to talk about Kody anymore. She's done going to the past. She wants to move forward with her life, and that constantly revisiting what she did and what happened with Kody has been very painful for her, and that this book was like a way for her to close the chapter altogether by sharing what she was comfortable with sharing and putting sort of that end exclamation point on it so that it was all tied up. So if there's anything beyond season 20, I will be very surprised, and I would be very surprised if Christine continues if there is more after season 20, because why would you want to continue to be on a show with your ex-husband that you don't like? So what I want, I think something that might get overlooked because it's a very small part of her book, but it's a really impactful part of the book, and it's surrounding her leaving Kody. And she shares that she had to sit down and tell their producer that she was leaving. And when they found this producer's name is Tim Gibbons, he approached them in 2009 or 8 about a show, believing that polygamists were being denied civil rights. It was a civil rights issue. And civil rights does not generally include polygamy. Civil rights is generally related to issues of race and gender and ethnicity and sexuality. But practicing polygamy and trafficking and labor trafficking of women and sex trafficking under the guise of religion is not a fundamental civil right. You can practice religion, but you can't break the law. You have freedom of religion, but you don't have freedom to use religion to break the law. And that's why polygamy is not a civil right. And he believed that they could win this and legalize it if they viewed it as a civil rights issue. But even Christine admits in this book that they were unable to use that argument with legislatures in Utah because it's not a civil rights issue. So instead, they had to use and focus on the abuse angle. And she admits that they had to move away from the civil rights issue to an abuse angle to get laws changed in Utah. And she also admits that it's still a felony in the state of Utah, which I've told you all the time. Yes, it's not a felony if you have a man with multiple wives. It's not. But if there's every other thing like abuse or, having someone get married through coercive means, which I would argue Kody absolutely coerced Christine into a marriage because he wasn't attracted to her. He didn't want to be married to her, but he did it anyway. And he did it because she was polygamy royalty. He wanted clout within the church and he wanted a third wife. So he, under false pretenses, made her believe that he wanted her to be his wife, and then she stayed with him for over 20 years, and he didn't want to be with her the entire time. I mean, she's very clear that Kody completely lied to her, misled her, and tricked her into a marriage, and that he was so selfish that he didn't want to let her find someone else because he didn't believe she could be happy with anyone else. So he denied her the right to be with someone else, but he didn't want to be with her. He just wanted to have her and control her, but he didn't care to do anything to keep her. And that's the very definition of coercion when you marry someone under false pretenses or in polygamy. And so if you were going to go off of what the rules are, he could be charged under that for Christine. And that's just sort of a side note to say polygamy in the structure that she was raised in doesn't really exist without the systemic abuse and oppression and subjugation of women. And unfortunately, Christine is still in a place where she recognizes the harms of what polygamy does. I was telling my husband last night that I think she's about 10 years premature for this book. I think she's doing this because she needs to end her chapter with Sister Wives, but I suspect that if she were to wait 10 years from now to write this book, the book would be very different. I truly believe it would be very different because I think the further away she is from polygamy and the further she gets away from Kody, she's going to see things even more clearly. And I think she's just too in it still to see clearly, because when you have a narcissist gaslighting you and you're being gaslit through production, through questions on the show, and you're having to deal with the constant narcissistic gaslighting of Kody, you're still dealing with the manipulation. And I'm not a psychologist by any means. I'm just telling you based on my experience, having worked with people that have left cults and having covered these, so many victims and survivors of cults, it usually takes years for them to really understand the amount of trauma and abuse they experienced and really wrap their head around it in a way where they can actually understand what it was without feeling guilt or shame. And right now she feels so much shame, which is really sad because she's embarrassed. She says she's embarrassed that she lived this way. She's embarrassed that she allowed her children to grow up this way. She's embarrassed that she allowed him to treat her this way. And I think years from now, if she were to write this book, it would shift from being ashamed because shame implies she did something wrong and that it's her fault, and more from, oh my God, I was being abused. She goes to the line of suggesting she wasn't being abused, but she doesn't say it outright. Everyone has their own states. But to get back to the producer, because the producer had a specific vision for the show, when he was told about the end of their marriage, he left. So she wrote this. I knew many of them were cheering for me and it brought comfort. I always been a little odd being a character on TV, but this time it would be so personal. I needed to be authentic, maybe more than I ever been, because I knew I would serve as example for so many. And I'm really glad that she was. We needed to tell our producer, Tim, and immediately I know that sounds crazy, but he would need to know for the storyline for the season, but also because it would likely become noticeable that I was packing and that Kody wasn't coming over. I told Kody he needed to tell Tim with me. Why do I need to be there? Kody wanted to know. You're the one who's leaving, right? But we needed to figure out our strategy for the network. Also, you're the reason I'm leaving. We met over Zoom and Tim cried when we told him. I was afraid it was this, he said. By that time, we'd all spent so much time together that I think he genuinely cared about us.